Hi there, my name's Aaron Wilder, and I'm the curator of the Amos Eno Gallery exhibition, Unstable Language, on artsy.net. And with me today is Emma Werowinski, who's one of the amazing artists in the show. Emma, good to be with you.
Likewise.
I thought we could start out by talking about your work in both textiles and in your design work, and that they're these very closely overlapping concentric circles. Can you talk a little bit about how aesthetics and materials work together in your practice?
I am so often thinking about what my work is about that I don't actually always reflect on the materials, even though I do consider them. So it's fun to specifically think and talk about that part of my work. It's very important to me that I come out of this craft background in textiles, and that my sense of material and aesthetics is grounded in that tradition, which has been happening for as long as humans have needed to clothe themselves. Like I
Right.
feel very lucky to be part of that lineage and making things in that lineage. I like to use materials in my work symbolically, because the concepts that I find myself talking about are can be really, heady. I'm talking about how we frame the world in these works specifically. I like talking about big systems. I like talking about and fascinated by government bureaucracy, these huge things that can feel really intense and unknowable or hard to understand.
Hmm.
And so I think about material and specifically textiles as being something that makes it easier for people to engage with those topics, just first and foremost. Like using, we're constantly interacting with our fabric in our lives, and we
Mhm.
have been since literally birth. So we all have memories and associations with it. And it gets easy for people to sense where a type of material, textile material, like a patterning of textile material is coming from, just because we've been around it our whole lives and we clothe ourselves. So we have an innate understanding of what we would pick in order to mean something out in the world. And specifically in these works, and a lot of my quilting works, I like to use cotton fabric. And cotton fabrics that have prints that are kind of Americana, or actually older US patterning, pattern designs, to link them to this, my interest in government in the United States and the mythos of the United States. And even though these works are about metaphors, that still is something I think about all the time. So looking at this, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I also, as a human, I like to sew my own clothes. I sew a lot. I have a ton of fabric, and I actually have fabric of my mom's and my grandma's. So the background of this piece is a curtain that was hanging up in the kitchen of my mom's childhood home. So it's like a kitchen that like a curtain that my grandma made for her kitchen.
That's a great
That
background story.
isn't that so fun? And it's so funny because I showed this to my mom and she was like, "Oh, I don't necessarily have a good sense memory with that." And I was like, "Whoa, okay, I'm so sorry." Um,
It's a new
but
life. You
it's
gave the
giving it
fabric new life.
thank you. Yeah. And that's very important to me from just reduce, reuse, recycle. I think it's really important to search for and use existing materials instead of always creating new things. But I love the story of that fabric being in this piece, especially because first of all, it's like a quilt and the background looks like a quilt, even though it's printed. So there's some aesthetic levels, meta levels going on. This metaphor and what I'm talking about in the piece is this idea of are you exactly who you're raised by? Are you exactly like your family? In this original proverb of the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. We use it to talk about how, oh, so and so is exactly like who their parents were. So and so is exactly like who raised them. And I feel like it's like this often can be dismissive. We use it to excuse bad behavior or to say, well, of course that person is the way they are. They can't change because that's who they were raised by. And in trying to flip it around or rewrite it or point out that it's more than just who you're raised by. It's more than just your parents that define who you are as a person and how you exist in the world. I like that I'm using this textile that comes from like my family and like who I am and who my mom is and who my grandma is. So I like to pull things materially to like link to histories like that. So in this case, it's a personal history, but I often really like, I think even in this one, it's like got a bit of an Americana vibe, right? So it's like also linking to this idea of like history in a place, and the ways that like we clothe ourselves in history or we think about history and we portray it to people.
And in your design work, do these materials and fabrics show up in your translation of bureaucraties
Yeah.
to people in your job?
So in my design job, I'm like really lucky to have a job where I get to think about the same things, but in a different way. And I like don't use actually like my work is very like unaestheticized. I work for a nonprofit in the election space, and I essentially do graphic design or information design. And a huge part of what I do in that job is like do user research to understand like how to make election about or elections information about voting clear to voters and clear to the people who run elections like poll workers, and in doing that I talk a lot about like the framework, so like taking out the aesthetics, which is really interesting. So
Mm.
I think a lot about like the structure, like what are rules about structure, what are rules about like plain language and clear design so that people can use and understand and find, use, and understand the information that they need in order to like access the right to vote. And my theory there is like it's a framework, and then you put your aesthetics on top of that framework of information design, to make it match where you are in the country. So it's like interesting, right? Because some of the strategies are very similar, but the aesthetics are very different. Because ultimately, I think aesthetics is so personal to like a place and a person, personal to like who you are and to the community you're in and to who you're wanting to talk to specifically. So yeah, it's like not as much a part of my design work as it is in my art practice.
When I saw your submission, since then, I've noticed how many times a day I say it is what it is.
Me too, honestly. I'm like so happy. I really am. Like that's like the best piece of feedback I could ever hear, because I think that was like the whole point of making these. Is I was
Yeah,
like,
it's
we say
awareness.
these awareness, like we say these all the time, and these like metaphors that we use, these proverbs or metaphors we use, like literally structure how we interact with the world. There's a lot of like research about how that is true. Like they come from the world and then they impact the way that we exist in the world again. How limiting is that? And maybe there's an equal world where it is what it is sort of this like radical acceptance, but I feel like we use it to sort of just be like, well, we can't do anything about it. And so if we can like acknowledge the number of times that we maybe are saying, like sort of giving up or like not stepping into a hard conversation about something to like see what we can change about the world we're in, I'm like, that's great. Both in myself, like I hope I'm doing that.
Well, and what's so great about the different artists in the show is that it is using art in a way to reimagine things or to see things in a different way.
I agree. And I think I just read What Art Is by Brian Eno, just like defining, talking about like art or its ability to like impact the world. One of the principles in that was art is of no inescapable
Mhm.
consequence, which I struggled with at first. And then I after like finishing the book, I was like, oh, I get it. The idea that like art can put us in a place to think about the world differently and see the world differently, and we won't experience like material consequences of trying that out once we leave the piece of art or we move away from it. And like, I love that we get to do that in the things that we make. I think it's so important. And I think about how the things that I can try out in my art practice are very different when then I what I can try out in my design practice in my job, where I think about similar things, but like I'm operating in a different space with a different positionality.
And Emma, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I want
Yeah,
to
thank
remind
you.
everyone that Unstable Language is on artsy.net through December 1st.
Thank you, Erin.